Well, good morning, Shepherd of the Valley. How are we this morning? We're doing all right? I think so. Well, if we haven't met, I'm Sam, one of the pastors here at Shepherd, and it's a joy to be with you today for so many reasons. One, I have chosen what I wore for a great specific reason. Okay? Anybody a quick skull? Skull! Okay, your faces, I'll just keep to the script. We'll just give, yeah, okay, good. I got some tech guys who are all in. You may notice the colors to my right. I had nothing to do with that myself. But we are so glad that you are with us today, whether you are a Vikings fan, some other kind of fan, or no NFL fan whatsoever. That's all fine. I'm glad you are with us. Today, I'm excited. Since about April, I have been thinking about this theme, the blessing and a curse. I went to Jeremy in April and I said, hey, this is kind of cool. This theme is from top to bottom, left to right of the whole Bible. What would it be like if we spent some time really digging into this theme and how we could live it out? And so pressure's on, I suppose, since I've been thinking about this since April. But we're excited as a community to move in this direction for quite some time. And the sub-theme that we're going to tackle together is a blessing and a curse, the origins. The origins. So we're going to look at the first few times in the biblical story, in the book of Genesis in particular, where this concept of blessing and a curse shows up. Now, in order to kind of get into it today, I want to start with another word. It's going to seem random, and it is, the word shed. Now, many of you know that it's obviously, a shed can mean a small structure to put things in, especially the things that you don't want in your house. You know what I'm saying? But in my house, the word shed in the 11-year-old's mind means hair, like shed hair, like our Louie, our golden retriever that sheds hair. Following me so far? So she was super surprised when I used the word shed in a different context. The other day, I just simply asked her, did your teacher shed a tear? And she looked at me like I was crazy. Like, how on earth could a teacher shed a tear? That concept had never crossed her mind. And that is what the English language, that's what language in general tends to do, is it might have multiple meanings. You follow me so far? And what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of these key words, particularly a blessing, and we're going to learn how this kind of theme is throughout Scripture. For a lot of years, I used to read Scripture, and I would see these words used, and I'd be like, wait, well, the Gospel of John uses it like this, and then someone else uses it like this. Which one's right? And of course, you know the answer is yes. What the biblical authors tend to do is build on the meaning of a word, and most definitely they begin in the beginning. Every good Jewish person who became a Christian in the first century was paralleling what they were understanding about who Jesus was to what was said in the Old Testament, particularly in the beginning in Genesis. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with some of these key words from the beginning, and we're going to look at how God uses these words to give us an expansive definition of what he's all about. Now, you've heard this word blessing before. Raise your hand just so I know that you're with me today and you've got a pulse. Excellent. You've heard this word. You may have heard this when someone sneezes. Of course, they say, bless you. Or if you go down south, they might say, bless your heart, which I don't think they're trying to bless my heart. I think they're trying to do something else, but I'm not from the south, so I don't know. But maybe you've heard a sports athletes get on the mic and say, I'm so blessed, maybe after a win or something. But many of us interact with this in social media. Particularly Instagram uses this term, #blessed. Hashtag is a way to search one specific thing. Are you following me? So you might take a picture of the sun and then put #blessed. And it's a way for the whole world to search one specific word on social media. So I simply typed in this week, #blessed. And guess what happened? I discovered 145 million posts showed up. And so the world is working with this word, blessed. And as I scrolled through, there were some significant themes that I saw. I saw themes of birthdays, special occasions, trips, accomplishments would use that word, #blessed. Those, I don't know why, but people flexing in front of the mirror often put #blessed. Babies, #blessed. Their families, #blessed. Now, all of that is fine, right? But as I looked at all those different ways that people interacted with the word blessed, I came to notice something that you've probably noticed in the uses that you have heard or seen. That blessed often has to do with external things, correct? And so it begs the question, who doesn't want to be blessed? Anybody here not want to be blessed? Man, I'm just going to keep preaching because you guys are looking like you don't have a pulse. I love you, but like smiling or nodding is okay. And that's the last time I'll jab you, so you can just be who you are, but we'll keep moving. #blessed, or the concept of blessed, often has connotations around external things. Dare I say health and wealth and prosperity. And as a result, sometimes we look at our lives and other people's lives and say, they're blessed. You could say they're fruitful. They've got a whole bunch of stuff going on in their lives. They're busy, they're talented, they're beautiful, they're buff, they're rich. Whatever the case may be, they're prosperous. And as a result of looking at others who seem fruitful, sometimes if we're honest, we can think to ourselves, well, I don't feel blessed. I don't have as much as fill in the blank. I'm not as smart as fill in the blank. I'm not as rich as fill in the blank. And if we stick with just kind of the world concept of blessed, we go through life comparing each other about who's more blessed than others. And it begs the question, of course, if those kinds of people are blessed, well, what does it mean if you have less? Are you still blessed? What if you live in a third world country, or could you still be blessed? Of course, we lean in and our gut, our hearts say, yes, there has to be a way for the whole world to be blessed, and yet maybe blessing could look wider, more expansive than our typical external picture of what blessing is, of what fruitfulness is. But let's be honest, we all want to be blessed, but we all want it to look a certain way, and we all want to achieve that blessing our own way. Isn't that true? We want to be blessed, but we want it to look a certain way. We want our lives to be fruitful in the way that it seems that the world teaches us fruitfulness is. And we want it to arrive at those conclusions in the way that feels right to us. We want it to look a certain way, and we want to arrive at the blessing our way. And what we want to do, and this is going to scare some of you, over the course of the next number of months, may or may not have scared you, is our hope is to help us understand who's blessed, what blessed people do, what blessed people don't do. How do we receive a blessing? How do we give a blessing? We're going to start in the origins and wrap our minds around what the original biblical authors thought of blessed. And then we'll continue to move closer and closer into our everyday lives to see how we can live in this theme. Because this theme of blessed is literally from the beginning of the book of the Bible to the end. And so what I want to do is I want to go to Genesis, where it all began and where the biblical authors begin to help us understand what blessed is. Are you ready? If you're ready, say, I'm ready. If you're not, say, hold up. Very good. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28 says this: God, there's our word, blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Genesis chapter 1, 28. Now, just a few verses earlier, this is the second place that blessed is used. The first time blessed is used is God speaks a blessing over the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. And that word blessed talks about how then they were called to multiply. To multiply. So something in the concept of blessing, the author wants us to know from God to us, is that blessing does have in it some concept of multiplication. It's in this meaning. And then we see that for humans, that God, for the first time, if you know the Genesis account, God begins to speak and things move into order. Day 1, day 2, all the way down to day 6. There's multiple things unique about day 6, and one that is beautiful is God speaks directly to the humans. God, for the first portions, we're just speaking life into things, and now he speaks directly to humanity, and he says this: be blessed, be blessed, be blessed. Now here's one working definition. There's a few fancy smancy smart versions of this, but I chose to go with John Mark Comer's version of what the definition of blessing is. Blessing is a gift from God to generate life, fertility, and well-being. I want to pause right there and stop and say, for some of you, that definition might bring some pain. Because for one reason or another, you might look at your life or someone close to you and realize that they have not been able to birth children for various complicated reasons. And so for the rest of the sermon, you might be tempted to say, I guess the implication is Sam is saying I'm not blessed. And I'm simply not here to say that. In fact, what I'm encouraging you to do, in the same way that the word shed has multiple meanings, as we look at the word blessed, I want you to hold on. For in the few weeks, we're going to understand why God's original blessing didn't come to fruition as the way he had intended it to be. And the quick answer is Genesis 3 means sin entered in the world. And God's intention of blessing and wholeness and shalom was thwarted by humans grabbing a hold of life and choosing their own way. So if that's you in the house, I want you to know you are still invited into the table of God. You're still invited into the blessing. But this definition helps us understand what multiplication can look like. It's a gift from God first. All blessings come from God. You could think of it as blessing is grace on your life to generate life, fertility, and well-being. We're going to expand on this definition. Here's my more basic definition. Blessing is fruitfulness produced God's way. It's fruitfulness in our lives, in every area of our lives, as long as we do it God's way. It's putting him first. It's allowing him to lead. It's putting him in the control center of our lives. And when we do it his way, God will produce in us fruitfulness, a fruit that will last. What was the first thing in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28? He said, God bless them. I love this. Before the humans do anything, God deems them blessed. I want you to soak that in, church. Any temptation to fill in the blank of what blessing is based on what we do is getting ahead of the game. Because what God says is that we're blessed, period. It's our identity. It's the grace that he gives you and me. And what our temptation to do as humans is to reach. If everybody had this proverbial fruit table of various levels of fruit, and mine was standing right here, our temptation is to reach for somebody else's. Our temptation is to compare our table with somebody else's table. Am I not right? And what we also are tempted to do is say, how did they get their blessing? How did they get their financial gain? How did they get their family system? How did they get happy? And try to mimic what they did, what we see on the outside, and try to do it on the inside to get the same result. That's the temptation for each and every one of us, is to reach out of God's plan, reach into someone else's way of trying to receive and get the fruitfulness. But I want you to see this, church. that blessed is not what we reach for. Blessed is who God says we already are. You can leave today, whether you live in Africa or Afton, and say, I'm blessed. Because when God spoke the world into existence, before we took our first crawl, God said, I have stamped you with my image, which was just a verse or two that I did not read before this. And he said, I call you blessed, not because of what you do, but because of who you are, that you are my extension, my hands extended to the world. You have heard that phrase, you are the image of God, that comes from this Genesis here. It's like we're his icon. The Greek version of the word image is icon. What does an icon do? An icon represents the brand. It represents the person. If you're a rock icon, you're some sort of representation to the world of your rock abilities. Correct? We are God's icon. We are his representation to the world of who God is. And he says, because he, the benevolent God of the universe, is of course blessed, he puts that stamp on us and he says, you're blessed. But we often look at other people's tables and we say, this is what fruitfulness is. And I want what they got, or I want more of what I currently have. But I want you to know, when God says you're blessed, when he stamps you with it, it doesn't look like this. It looks like this. When he stamps you with blessing, you come out of the womb not like this, but like this. If you can't see it, what's in my hand is a various packets of seeds that my wife and I did not use last summer. I was going to go buy some, but my wife said, we have a whole bunch. This is your life. When he says you're blessed, he said you're seeds. He says that you have everything inside of you that he has called you to be, with your DNA, with your gifts, with your talents. And we so often look at what people have produced and say, this is what I want, instead of seeing what God has put on the inside of you and I. Whew. This for me brought me great joy, because this takes out the circumstantial comparison game. This takes out me looking at the NFL players and saying, I dreamt of being you my whole life. I guess I'm not #blessed. But he says, you know what? I made you to be something else. And he's made you to be something else. What's better than fruitfulness is seeds. Unlimited potential of what you can become and grow in your life when you do it. Whose way? God's way. So let's look at closer at what he says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. If you're new to this church, I'm literally on like one verse today. And so come back next week. Pastor Jeremy will probably have like 50. So he'll kind of round us out. But we're just getting one verse today. God blessed them and said to them, what? He first blessed them. Then he said, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. He says you're blessed. It's what you are. And look at what he does. But it's also what he's inviting us to do. To be fruitful, increase, and subdue it. He's inviting you to not only be blessed, but to cultivate the blessing. To cultivate the blessing. And what I'm going to do for the next few minutes is show you two ways that you can cultivate the blessing. Because blessed is who you are, and blessed is what we do. We cultivate blessing in our lives. Because we're seeds, because we're this, he deems us blessed, but he invites us to take our next step. Does that make sense? And the first thing I want you to see is he's inviting us to recognize and receive it. Can you say that with me? 1, 2, 3. Recognize and receive it. How do we cultivate it? How do we cultivate blessing? First, we have to begin to recognize and receive it. I love this image that I came across years ago about various different homeowners that purchased homes. And what was so interesting about them is they purchased a home for a certain price with a certain value. But I'm going to share with you 3 different homes that found different things of great value after they purchased the home. There's a homeowner that purchased a home in Alberta, Canada, and after they were renovating the house, they found Hollywood posters worth $600,000. Bada bing, bada boom. Another home was purchased, and they discovered a comic book collection worth $3.5 million. Now, there's more. I just kind of like these three. There's a house in Northern California. They found gold coins in this, literally this like trunk under a tree worth $10 million. Can you imagine being the homeowner that sold that house? You'd be like, what was I thinking? I can't believe it was there the whole time. Do you see where I'm going? So often what we look and see in the mirror is overlook the seeds that God has placed inside of our hearts. Seeds of potential, of strength, of skill, incredible abilities that were put in you by God because you are #blessed actually. Have you seen those things? Have you slowed down long enough to celebrate them? I am such a big fan of Thanksgiving. I think it's perhaps the holiest day of the year because people of all walks of life pause and they give thanks. What would it look like if we began to go just a little bit slower and started having rhythms of gratitude, recognizing all the ways in which God has blessed us? Blessed us personally, blessed our families. After all, you didn't choose where you were born, did you? And so our first step when it comes to cultivating the blessing that God says you already are is to slow down and create rhythms to recognize and celebrate who God says you are. This last week, in fact, our staff brought in someone from Hosanna who's a strengths expert. Many of you have heard of the Paradigm Strengths Finders, and they give you your top 5, and it was such an electric, exciting place to be on a Monday morning at Shepherd of the Valley. Why? Because people were spoken life into and seeing themselves as the people that God had created them to be. Isn't it fun to know more about who you are and how God's created you to be? Isn't it more enjoyable when you're walking in life, stepping into your sense of sweet spot, when you're using the gifts that God's given you with your time and your talents? May us be those kinds of people that recognize what God's placed inside of us. Not even just inside of us, because some of you are like, that's old hat, I know what I'm really good at. But if you recognize what God is doing in this season, have you stopped to slow down to consider, man, I'm 62, I'm 75, I'm 99, I'm 45, however old you are, and say, what does God want me to do with what I am and who I am? Right here, right now. What I know is when you begin to ask those kinds of questions, God begins to answer those questions, and He gives us a sense of purpose that's more valuable than any level of fruitfulness that you could compare yourself to somebody else when this happens. Now, you're not just called to recognize it and receive it, because it is a grace to be given, but I want to show you the second step today. It's found in the further looking at Genesis chapter 1. It says this: God blessed them, and He said to them, you know this passage by now, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth, and look at this, subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds of the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Then God said, look at this, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seeds in it. They will be yours for food. God not only blesses them and says who they are, but He says you're blessed to go and do something. That word subdue is the word kabosh. Can you say that with me? 1, 2, 3. Kabosh. It's the Hebrew word. One more time. Kabosh. Kabosh. It means to order it. It means to arrange it. It means to take something that is tame or what is wild and make use of it. You and I imagine the Garden of Eden being this perfectly well-manicured place. And I could be wrong. Pastor Jeremy will be here next week to clarify. But I think the biblical author wants us to see a little bit different picture of Eden. Not one of everything well-groomed, but of one that gives potential for the humans to garden it, to form it, to shape it. This is God's intention for your life and my life. That we look at how we're designed, how we're blessed, and spend our lives investing into the places that we live and work in such a way that things thrive, that things multiply, that things have life. There's something called the triple bottom line. The triple bottom line is when businesses do good in the world, that they treat their employees well, and that they treat the earth well. This is what it means to kabosh, to steward, to manage, to groom, to order, to take something that is wild and create it into something beautiful. For those note takers out there, to cultivate blessing, first we recognize and receive it. Second, we kabosh it. We work it. We work it. So often we say, well, work was a result of the fall. Actually, work was designed before the fall ever happened. And I have a bonus insight for another sermon. I'm not going to spoil it. And so what happens? We're seeds. And we're called to use them and plant them and cultivate them. And then we look at our kids and we go, why can't they just be? What's he saying? Parents, we're called to cultivate, to go slow, to move on their pace. Right? And we want to scream at the seeds, grow faster. We want to yell at our kids, grow up. Or we look at our finances and we say, would you multiply faster? Whatever it may be. Or you look at your gifts at work and you're like, I don't feel as competent as I want to be. Go faster, grow. And God's saying, would you just work it? Would you just spend time? This is what it means to kabosh, to nurture the things that God's called us to nurture and grow, and to do it to the best of our ability. If you're a dentist, be awesome. If you're in school, be a great student. If you're a leader or a boss, love and see your role as kabosh, ordering the disorder. Which almost sounds like impossible, right? Oh, I thought that was funny, thinking about human beings and how crazy they are. What would it look like if we began to see our work as simply kabosh? Things that we can work and order and tame for the good of humanity so that it might thrive. What we see in the biblical story is we start in a garden and we end in a garden city. Why? What's a garden city? Just more well-developed gardens. If you think you're going to get to heaven, get some wings, and sit on the beach the rest of your life, it's not the biblical picture. You're going to be invited to work it, to kabosh, to develop things, to grow things, to invent things. So enjoy it. Get after it. Do it. Some of you are yelling at your seeds in your life and you're saying, grow faster, when he's just asking you to tend to it. Some of you are looking at said seeds like carrots and you're going, would you just be a pumpkin seed? I want to grow pumpkins. This is the danger of comparing ourselves to somebody else, because he's inviting us to be who we're called to be. I met this guy who was really ripped. He was like Mr. Minnesota, and I literally said, how did you get so big? Some of you know I do a little bit of lifting. It's funny because it doesn't look like it. It's fine. And this guy is ripped. And he goes, I don't know. When I lift, I just get big. That was his answer. When I do curls, they just get big. And I'm like, when I do curls, they don't do anything. What's my point? Some of you are so trying to be a pumpkin or what is this, a watermelon or a pineapple. Clearly, I'm in the right business. Or some of you are trying to work so hard to be something that you're not, when God's just inviting you to grow really good carrots and be okay with the small muscles that you have. Am I preaching to somebody? I'm being silly, but you get it? Blessing. Producing fruitfulness in your life God's way. And the ultimate example of this was Jesus, as he came on the planet and had such a fruitful life, not by being somebody else, not by trying to take down Herod or Caesar Augustus, but by being him and leading with humility and love and grace, because he was the image of the invisible God. And what does that Jesus say? Look at this as we close. He says, you did not choose me, but I chose you. That's grace. That's blessing. And I appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit. What kind? Fruit that will last. As you look at your life, as you look at your goals, and you dream of what fruitfulness will be, might I remind you to have an eternal perspective as we close today. A perspective to say there are some fruits that we might be chasing after that look great, but on the inside, they're rotten and they won't last. May we have kingdom lenses with a kingdom outlook to say, God, may I bear the fruit that you're asking me to bear and that will last forever. Stepping into his kingdom his way. I've been quite literally thinking about, Gabby last week talked about cultivating in a different way. And she reminded me of, in her sermon, she talked about in the Message version, it says, walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. Last week reminds me of this week. Can you imagine what it would look like for us to read the scripture and to be in community, to walk with each other, and to allow God to almost literally, I just had this image of a father and a son, mother, daughter, whatever picture you prefer, me and my son, learning how to grow something into the ground. Watch me, work with me. Watch how I do it. Walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. My son grows up to somehow magically know how to do a garden. Not because he manifested all the knowledge of himself, but he saw his father do it. Walk with him. Work with him. Watch how he does it. So you can produce a fruit, not as somebody else's, not of one that will be rotten or die, but that will last forever. As we say yes to the blessing, because it's what we do, it's who we are and what we do. Amen? I'm done.